All right, so who wears it better? That's the question for today's program. Kennywood Park or the PWSA? And really the question is, who's doing a better job of poisoning their customers? And the reason why I say that is a new article came out just today that one man is suing, or just the other day, that one man is suing Kennywood Park because, according to this headline, an eye-eating parasite was sprayed into his eye on the Raging Rapids during a trip to Kennywood. So what's worse, eye-eating parasites or lead poisoning? Welcome to the River's Edge Radio Network, broadcasting live here at Mr. Small's Theater. I am Brian Crawford. With me, as always, Michael Cohen, and behind the board we have Zach Fell. Which would you prefer, Michael, if you had to pick an eye-eating parasite or lead poisoning?
I mean, I feel like as an adult, probably lead poisoning. Although here's my thing. I don't know if I believe that there's an eye-eating parasite. So if it was some guy in a thick Yinzer accent telling me that I could have lead poisoning or an eye-eating parasite, I'd probably go with the eye-eating parasite.
Well, the man is, not only is he suing Kennywood, it now has come out through the Post-Gazette that Kennywood does not test the water for their water rides. And if you remember a little while ago, I was outraged because of the closing of the log jammer, and I was very, very passionate about wanting that ride to stay open. But now I'm starting to reconsider my stance.
Wait, hold on. But where is this man? What is the eye-eating parasite that this man is alleging, though?
All right, so let's see here.
Did a doctor tell him that this happened?
Yeah. He actually, he went to the doctor.
So the man does have an eye-eating parasite. Yeah,
the quote here, it says, the water shot into his eye, and almost immediately thereafter, he started having problems. And if the thing will stop scrolling, it says the parasite is still there. It doesn't completely go away, so that's the problem that he's dealing with now. So
wow.
He's got this parasite. Okay. He says it came from Kennywood. Now, I guess I don't know how you prove that it came from Kennywood unless you test the water. So maybe they'll bring the PWSA in to test the water.
I think I'd 100% take lead poisoning over that.
It's weird, yeah.
Because the thing is, dumb people don't usually know they're dumb, and lead just makes you dumb, right?
This is a fair point. In our current society, you could thrive.
Yeah.
Look, I mean, Donald Trump made it to the presidency, so the sky is the limit for people who aren't there.
For chew paint chips, yeah.
Yeah.
Just chewing your way to the top.
But with an eye-eating parasite, does it just eat the eye? I guess it does. So eventually, I'm imagining it's going to die once you go eyeless.
Yeah, once it's out of food.
I can't even imagine that because I have like a hawk's vision. I sit here in the studio, so this is a true thing. We're here in the studio. We've got this beautiful view of the courtyard. Typically, right now, we don't have a view of the courtyard because it's so dark out at 7 p.m. This is why I hate winter. It needs to. If it was brighter out, it wouldn't be as bad. But it's so depressing with the dark skies and the pitch black view. But anyways, during the daytime, I can literally see details in the siding on houses on the other side of the valley. So I feel like for me, it would be kind of traumatic to have an eye-eating parasite taking away my perfect vision. But that's an interesting story. We've got lots of good things going on today. We have, and I'm very excited about this, we will have in a few minutes David Tessiter of openpittsburgh.org, which is a really interesting site that talks about making Pittsburgh transparent, among other things as well. And we're going to go into all of the details as to what being an open government means. We're going to talk about the Amazon bid, which Pittsburgh is in the running for to bring Amazon here. And I had mixed feelings on it before, but with the current information that we've heard that the city is denying right-to-know requests from different media agencies, my opinion is starting to waver on that front as well. We've got that. We've got the weird news, including an interesting Waffle House experience, a t-shirt at Walmart, and that will lead us into the closing segments where we're going to talk a little bit about freedom of speech and where the line is drawn, should there be a line drawn, and all of that good stuff. So lots of good stuff for today's program. So, being that, let's bring in Mr. Tessiter to the studio. He's right here. He's sitting here. You've made it just from a meeting. You managed to make time. I appreciate that. And I saw you were quoted recently in the paper on this Amazon bid, And basically, the government is refusing to release the information of what is all in this bid to the general public, which leads me to believe that they're probably going to be giving Amazon everything and they're not going to be paying taxes. Is that what you suspect?
Well, the Allegheny Conference at its annual meeting, which was the Wednesday after the election day, which is the entity that basically tells the elected officials what to do, and they're the ones that are coordinating all of the bidding, did announce that this was to be silenced, that they were not going to let that out, that other municipalities around the country that were the 300 or some or whatever were telling what they were saying. And the head of PNC, who's now the chair of the conference, was saying that while they have places in a lot of the other cities, and he goes on his visits and they announce how proud they are of what they're doing and tell everybody Pittsburgh's keeping their mouth shut, and he just thinks to himself, he said, suckers, you know. But what it is the conference functions on not having any controversy about what it's doing. It does everything. It's from the time it was created during World War II to silence any objections and controversy, whether it's through falsifying testimony or whatever we've seen happen. And so one of the things is not letting any information out so that nobody can raise any controversial questions about it. And sounds like the stadium deals. There they put it out in front of the people, and we voted it down 8-1 in the surrounding counties. They did it anyways. And they went ahead and did it anyway. And I was down there that weekend. This was the Thanksgiving weekend. We were down in Harrisburg talking with the elected officials, knowing that they were going to be doing an end run. Several of us went down there to try to keep that from happening. So yes, we see this sort of thing in the past. We've seen it now, and we'll probably be seeing it in the future. And that's one of the reasons the Open Government Amendment is so important, is because it's designed to stop that from happening.
Well, Pittsburgh's not the only city that's not releasing the information from their bid. From what I'm reading here, it looks like several of them did. About 30 cities have released the information, but many others haven't. So is there a reason competitively why Pittsburgh isn't, why some of these cities are releasing the information and others aren't?
Well, it's my understanding that once the bids are in, the bids are in. So it really doesn't make any difference. They're not going to be sweetening the pot. But as those bids are being considered, if there's no controversy in their local municipalities, then they're going to think, oh, well, maybe they can deliver on this, and that's going to increase their hold. The other side of it is too, that it can demonstrate to Amazon, don't worry about the public because we have them under our thumb.
Yeah, I mean, a bunch of protesters would definitely, or large petitions or something like that would definitely give Amazon the impression that they might have problems here, especially with the stuff that just happened in East Liberty, right, where you've got protests actually making some successful gains in regards to development and gentrification and stuff like that.
Well, they got an end run around that eventually anyhow, but at least slowed them down. It slowed them down. You're right. It slowed them down.
Like a win, you know what I mean? And it looks bad for big businessmen.
Now, I'm assuming what the city's offering Amazon, they probably won't be paying taxes, at least for a long time.
Oh, sure. I mean, even Target got that deal, right?
I mean, they do that with everybody. That's kind of the big thing. And that always is kind of frightening, because you bring a big company like Amazon in and look at the Sony plant out in Westmoreland County, where they got the tax deal. They came in, and as soon as they had to start paying taxes, they picked up and left.
It started with Volkswagen. Had 10 years, and at the end of 10 years, they were gone. Sony came in at the end of that 10 years. Right now, in downtown Pittsburgh, each one of these new residences, the conversions, have a 10-year tax abatement. They're not paying any taxes for the first $6,000 on taxes, which is a lot of taxes. They don't have to pay those taxes. So they get $60,000 subsidy right off the top, basically, spread over 10 years. To each of those buyers of those new units. It's a very similar process, whereas the people who live in their existing homes, they have to make up for the services.
And looking at Amazon, if they move in and they get the big sweetheart tax deals, they're looking at having multiple locations will take up a lot of space between that and UPMC. The question I always have to ask is, will anybody in the city of Pittsburgh be paying any property taxes?
Not if you're big.
How will the city operate? Yeah, I mean, that's the thing is, you can only squeeze the average person so much before eventually the money's going to stop, right? Because eventually the state can even come in and prevent you from raising taxes to certain degrees. I know they've done that with school taxes in Jeanette. They've actually came down and said you can't raise taxes anymore.
There are ceilings to what you can raise per year, et cetera, and especially on new appraisals. The impacts of this, though, are not just a matter of that. If they come in, the gentrification that could be sponsored by this would drive out a lot of existing places now. And the pressures for real estate speculation, which is why the Allegheny Conference is behind this. That's their big thing, is real estate speculation and getting public subsidies for it. Take areas like Allentown, where we work hard up on Warrington Road, Oregon Avenue up there, and the neighborhood around there, people are trying to do what they can to bring it up with the people who live there. But if you had the gentrification going in there, it's just going to drive people out. And
there's a way to grow smart, and I look at this community here that we're in, Millville. They are trying to grow and expand and bring people in, but they're really working hard to make this place affordable for the people who have already live here.
Right.
And it's interesting to see how that works. We were just talking, actually, yesterday. We had Ann Torrentino, who is the artist that was hired to do Millville's public art display, which is, if you've walked around downtown Millville, you've seen that little blue line that travels along the sidewalks, and that all comes together at Gap Park, where Gertie's Run actually runs underneath that park. So they added the blue line, and they've added a light display with that. It's really pretty interesting. I was actually able to, because me, Michael, a big shot here in this town, I was able to see the display before it was made public for all of the residents here. I mean, I'm a resident as well. But we were talking about how Millville is becoming an arts center in the Pittsburgh area, but it still has this blue-collar feel, and instead of the two colliding, they've managed to seem to bring the arts community and the blue-collared culture and merge them together, and they seem to coexist and work hand in hand instead of against one another.
Here's what you'll run into with that is there are a couple of different things that can really determine whether or not that works. Number one, if people own their homes, then all they're butt up against is raising property taxes, whereas when you have large renting populations like you did in East Liberty, there's really no way to do that because the rent is gonna go up.
Well,
there are ways you could.
I think there are ways, because I look at Millville, which is actually a high renting population.
Well, then what I'm telling you is the renters in this town are not going to get to stay. Like and I'm not saying that that's good. I'm not saying that that's right. I'm saying that is the problem. Is that the thing with gentrification is that people think that things move in steps, but they don't move in steps. You only have momentum, right? So it's like getting a ball rolling, basically, where like everyone can agree that cleaning up a trash lot or like painting over some like dilapidated thing with a mural looks good, but understand that you're creating a space that people with more money than you are going to want to move into, and that if you're renting, you're not going to get to stay in that space.
Well, there are some ways. A lot of what's being done is done with subsidies through TIFs and various other means. If instead you had a rent control provision, where if you're going to get the subsidies, you have to implement a rent control. That's a way that you could be able to, for keeping the people who are staying there having the capability.
I know also they're working with a land trust here in Millville, where they kind of have some control when things go up for sale as far as how that gets divvied out, so you can't just have somebody come in and buy up all the property.
Gotcha. Yeah, I mean, I think there are a lot of ways that you can create small patches of exception to that, or I think there are lots of like fantastical answers where you're just like, demand affordable housing be 50% of whatever, but like in actuality, I mean, like when it actually happens, the problem with pushing against economics while they develop in that way is that everyone working to gentrify that neighborhood is getting paid full time to do it and is making their money on it, and all the pushback comes from either underpaid or entirely grassroots activists doing it on their own time. So every step back or in the positive direction is done at this great expense.
I don't know if that's true in every community. I just look at, not to bring us back to Millville again, but the MCDC, which is really the organization that spearheaded a lot of the growth in this community, is made up of entirely of volunteers.
Right.
So I think it's a little bit of a different situation where you have people who are living in the community trying to build up their own home versus a paid professional coming in, like you have in other communities like Lawrenceville, where they're working to. And I know we're getting way off topic from Amazon, but it all kind of ties into the change that Amazon could bring, right?
And I think this is going to work at first, but I think in 10 years' time, Millville's going to run into the same problems that Lawrenceville and East Liberty are running into right now.
Well, I think that one of the things, too, is that for all the good things that a lot of the communities are doing, the policies that are in place are really going to rip the rug right out from underneath that.
Mm-hmm.
The proposed relocation of the Central Business District is to be out at the airport, spread around sort of like Brasilia, Brazil, where you have to drive between buildings because they're too far apart. And that's started back in the 80s when they bought up 30,000 acres to surround the airport. That was designed for that purposes. When they put in the Southern Beltway, that was to open up Bela Coal's area that had been strip mined 3 or 4 times to enable that to be used for real estate speculation, and that was the only thing that was counted as a reason for doing it. That whole process of moving the city businesses out that far, 20 miles away, is going to undermine the existing communities, and people are going to want to live closer to their work, so there's going to be new construction, more sprawl happening. We have had a continuing decline and still have a decline in population in this region. In the 90s, when we had an even higher rate of decline, we had the 3rd highest rate of land consumption and suburban sprawl in the country at the same time. The reason behind that is the public policy of taking money away from maintaining the existing highways and bridges that we have and putting it into new capacity to open up more farmland and more natural habitat for conversion to commercial and residential purposes. And that has happened continuously since then. It's still on the books. It's still moving forward.
Well, I could see that myself just in my lifetime as somebody who grew up across the county line. My family was, on my dad's side, was a family that moved from McKeesport into North Huntington, and even in my lifetime you would see all of this farmland get turned into little housing plans with McMansions and things like that, and shopping districts come in and everything else, and that's just been in 30 years you've seen a complete change. And
that has been done. In fact, back in the 90s they falsified the long-range plan in order to shift approximately $10 to $12 billion of federal transportation funds away from maintenance and into the new capacity to continue and push this process. In addition to that, you also have then the utilities monies going in, where the sewers and things which in previous decades or a good while ago were paid for by the speculators when they were converting a property, those now are paid for by the public, the ratepayers, et cetera. So this whole thing, it's turned things on its head. When Andrew Carnegie started by giving the libraries the idea of a public-private partnership, the idea was that the private paid and the public benefited. But now that whole concept's been turned on its head, and it's the public pays and the private benefits. And this whole process is being driven. We have an agency there who public officials kowtow to. And in Pittsburgh, it makes it extremely bad as far as openness on anything. So you mentioned the Open Government Amendment. Can you go into that a little bit, and how would that make a big difference in a situation like we have now with this Amazon bid, where the government is withholding information that could seriously affect your pocketbook and your rate of taxes and things like that? It's not just your pocketbook; it's your whole community, the life lifestyle that you have, et cetera, can be adversely impacted too. So what we're doing with the Open Government Amendment, which is designed for the city of Pittsburgh, is a model that could be used by other municipalities and at other levels of government eventually. We need to do it one place first. And what is part of that, the core of that, is a process of public participation that we used during the 1990s that I initiated with the regional planning for transportation. That's what we used to uncover all those falsifications. That process has now been adapted in the amendment for application across the entire spectrum of the municipal government, including water authorities. All right? So that you would have people, as when NPR did a piece on this back in 2016, when we were petitioning to get it on the ballot that year, and we actually got it on the ballot, but it got kicked off and the judge ruled us out. We didn't have time to get it back on.
What was the reasoning for him rolling it off of the ballot?
Well, the city objected, basically.
Mm-hmm.
The city objected, and he basically had said, well, it covers too much, you're trying to do too much, et cetera. And of course, our point is that the question on the charter itself, which was more complex, was even shorter than our question, which actually explained the areas. Mm-hmm. And all the information would be available for voters anyway. We didn't get a chance to adequately appeal that because the judge held his opinion until just before it went to press, so that we couldn't possibly get it back on. But what we do with that is, by having this apply to every part of it, you would have people there to be overseeing it. As I said, NPR had done a story on it, and their conclusion was this puts citizens in the middle of government. Right now, we're held on the outside. The most we can do is go down, you get 3 minutes to county council or city council, and that's about it. You can go and meet maybe individually, but you really don't have an opportunity to make a very quality input into it. That piece of bandwidth is held by the speculators and the lobbyists who are going to make money out of people's pockets. And so they can afford to be there. And so this process is big on that. But it also, in transparency, it adjusts how hearings are held so that they're held in a way that people have full information. It sends up notification so that you know about things happening before they have an impact on you rather than now after the fact, generally. And then it has accountability there, where it sets up. The new one is going to be setting up an independent office. Be open government office, would be independently elected director that would run as nonpartisan and would not be listing themselves as Democrat or Republican. They'd be
similar to like a magistrate or a school board
more
member.
so than that, because those, they still have a listing with the Democrats or Republicans. And the analogy would be for a government study commission. When a person runs for government study commission, they're not allowed to identify themselves as being of a party.
Okay. So it's a little bit more than that. It's
the idea is to make sure we isolate those various impacts, because the political parties are carrying the agendas basically of those with money invested interests, and it doesn't matter which party it is.
Well, in Pittsburgh too, it's a little bit more unique, where you pretty much have a one-party rule in the city for
Actually,
quite
we have
some time.
a three-party rule. We have the Democrats who hold office.
Uh-huh.
You have Republican rank and file who tend to want good government. There's some crazies in there too, but they generally want to see good government, efficient, effective government, not no government. And then you have the third party, and that's the Republican elite, and they keep the Republican rank and file at bay as they tell the Democrats what to do. And that's pretty much what we have. Now,
in Pittsburgh?
Yeah. The Allegheny Conference, that's all Republicans. You have Republicans who file with the Democratic Party, but basically it's the Republican elite are keeping the Republican rank and file who are trying to offer something different out of the way, and they just tell the Democrats what to do. I've had a congressman tell me, hey, I like your ideas. Where's the Allegheny Conference stand on this? I said, I don't know. You go get their approval first, then you come talk to me.
Interesting. So, but when it comes to the actual ballot, you don't see any Republicans.
Yeah, you don't see them. That's right. It's already picked pretty much. The people that are there are pretty well filtered by the time they get to the public.
Well, how do we get something like this pushed through then? Because I like the idea of this open government amendment. I think back to my time as a councilman, and in order to publish any ordinance, you would have to give notice and let people observe it and stuff like that.
There's two ways. This uses the home rule process, City of Pittsburgh's home rule. And through home rule, we can amend the charter. Now, council could put it on, but they're not going to put something like this on. So what we decided, we would write the model that has everything in it that's good, and not water it down by a political process, which normally would happen. And then we have to petition. We need 7,582 signatures of registered voters in the city of Pittsburgh in order to put it on the ballot. And so we need a little bit extra for that. Generally speaking, if you're going out and just asking people, you need more than double. But because we have a process where we have tablet computers on each petition clipboard that calls up online to our password-protected server each person's information, and we verify before they sign, and they have exactly what they're to sign. So we know we get close to 100%. We get about 98, 99% good signatures. We don't have to qualify as much. We don't have to go out and get 3 times as much. So then once that happens, now they're challenging, because this is something big, this is going to affect them. The chief of staff was just furious about this. There was actual accountability in there, that they could be held in court if they didn't do what they're supposed to be doing. And so there's going to be some pushback on this.
Well, do you get any pushback from people when you're going around and getting signatures? Do you get any pushback from the public?
It's very
on
easy.
something like
Generally,
this?
very easy to get signatures. Yes.
I can't imagine who would be opposed to having access to information.
Well, when we were
even if you don't want to read it, you still want to be able to if you.
Well, we had to
choose.
go to federal court in order to get an injunction last time, because we needed to bring in professional canvassers. Somebody who's just going out maybe now and then, they just didn't get us the numbers we needed, even though we were paying $2 a signature for each one to the person who's gathering the signature. We don't pay the person who's signing, but we can pay the person who's gathering it. And so we brought in, eventually we got 6 days extra, and we brought in professionals from out of state, and we got over 8,000 signatures and turned in over, I think it was 12 or 13,000 signatures that we turned in, which floored the judge who gave us the injunction to do that. But then we had the challenge, and we didn't make it on, which I'm actually glad about, because at that the amendment we had before was going to put it all under the mayor's hand. So now we found out that the mayor and his administration don't want this. We certainly don't want them administering it.
Right.
So that's why we're going back, and we're still working on. I'm trying to get some students from CMU to work with us on drafting the section that's going to set up this new office. We're looking at what the county control or city controller's office is like, how that's structured in there, the monies and stuff for budget, et cetera. And we need to get that. And then we'll also have to educate the public on this one, because it's going to be a bigger issue.
Now, I'm confused as to how an organization, a news organization, can file for an open records request, and how the city could deny something like that. How is that possible?
Well, as Joe Mistick, law professor at Duquesne Law School, refers to the right to know law as the right to not disclose law. It's actually worse with that law in place than it was before we had that, because under that law they can delay beyond any point that it's effective.
Okay.
And so they simply say, well, we'll do this, we're going to do that, et cetera. And it's denied, so then you go through appeal, and then you go da-da-da-da-da, and it keeps going down the line. It's just playing the game, running the clock out is what they're able to do with this whole process. What we do with the Open Government Amendment, however, is we put the right to know requests under the new independent Office of Open Government, or the Open Government Office. So that now it's done through the legal department under the administration, and you get these delays. This would be an evaluation that would be more open and objective. And yes, there are things that shouldn't be released. There's personnel issues.
Sure.
If there's a negotiation on real estate for a public purpose, that would be protected. However, what we put in the Open Government Amendment is that if it's a private individual who's going in to try to get monies out, subsidies, et cetera, that gets recorded and made public.
David Tester of openpittsburgh.org. We're going to get back with you, I think, after the weird news, because I really want to talk about one of the ideas that you did have to try to entice Amazon, which I guess now it's probably too late to throw that into a bid package, but it has to do with transportation. And, everybody knows that I am a big proponent of public transit and expanding that. So I tend to be more more fiscally conservative in some ways, where I don't want to just be throwing money around. But when it comes to public transit, everybody knows that I like to just do whatever we can. I would like to see the T expanded. I'd like to see more rail. I'd like to see more public transit, but we're going to get more into that. But right now, we got to roll into the weird news. Let's break things up again. You're listening to the River's Edge Radio Network. Let's play that weird news music. We are Pittsburgh's #1 weapon, fighting against the Mon Monster that hates public transit and has terrorized the city. Every year it terrorizes the city, but thanks to Michael and I and our 3 weird stories, we're able to keep the beast at bay and keep the entire city of Pittsburgh safe from total destruction. Story 1 comes from Walmart, actually, who pulled a t-shirt which was a pretty offensive t-shirt, and I'm really just surprised that Walmart was able to that they even put this on the shelf.
Whoa!
So basically, there's a t-shirt, and you can see it from behind us on the green screen. It says rope tree journalist, some assembly required. So basically, it's Walmart pushing a shirt that advocates the hanging of journalists. So as somebody who's in the media, I don't know if I really stand next to this t-shirt. There are other ways to express your dissatisfaction with the media. Donald Trump has it down to a science.
Right. Yeah, I also... Oh.
But to be fair to Walmart on that, their contractor put that out, and then as soon as it was brought to their attention, they pulled it.
They pulled it down, yes. This is a fair point.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like everyone should probably know at this point that, yeah, and I feel like before the internet, maybe this was more of a Southern cultural thing, but any lynching imagery is going to land very badly. Like I remember when I grew up in Connecticut, and when I first moved down to North Carolina, we were demonstrating against Bank of America, and we brought a piñata of their CEO that was filled with coal. And obviously, if you have a human piñata, the most rational place to put the rope is probably around the neck.
Yes.
Right. And we got there, and the other protesters were like, "What are you doing?" And we're like, "Oh, we're putting up," and they're like, "It looks like you're lynching him in the tree. You're in North Carolina. You can't do that." And we're like, "Oh, but he's white. It's fine." They were like, "Yeah, no, the whole imagery is just you're not reclaiming lynching." And we're like, right, okay, fair enough. And I feel like that was a Southern phenomenon, but with the internet and the kind of like homogenization of culture across the U.S., I don't know, I really want to have like my comedy brand or whatever be called like Gallows Humor Comedy or whatever. And the logo I wanted to use is the old game Hangman.
Yes.
Right. And I want just like the stick figure, with like a little like laughing emoji essentially over the face, and then the dashes where it says where it's all filled in says Gallows Humor or whatever. And I've kind of been shopping there and asking them, like, do you think I can get away with this imagery, given that it's not traditionally racialized? It probably comes over from Europe, but like in 2017, and people are like, yeah, probably not, dude.
Yeah, it probably would not go over very well. And speaking of journalism, and this shirt is just so crazy, but ABC, man, this isn't one of my story topics for the day, but my God, try giving the anti-media people cookies. You heard about the story with ABC, right, where they came out with extremely inaccurate information, and they instead of retracting, I had to deal with Michael Flynn and his contacts with Russia, where the Trump had asked him to make contact with Russia after he was elected. and ABC spun it as if it was collusion and everything else, which, who knows, it may come out still. The investigation's still underway. But they reported the facts incorrectly, and then instead of retracting it, they basically fluffed it and said, "Oh, we're reformatting how we, said this," and everybody's gone after.
They conwayed that. They were like, "Well, you knew what we meant."
Exactly.
Right? Yeah. No. Nice.
So, but that's story one.
Wow.
You have a story for us.
Yeah. We all remember, or maybe we don't. I don't know. My dad played a lot of computer games when I was growing up, so I remember Wolfenstein 3D. It came out before Doom. It was the original first-person shooter game, and I
did not know there was one before Doom. So.
Yeah, it was. But
I'm not much of a gamer.
And
so.
you killed Nazis, which at the time was very non-controversial. The reason they used Nazis was they were like, "What people can we have in a first-person shooter game that no one is going to care whether or not you kill them?" So, 2017 version comes out. You're still killing Nazis, except now it is. They've gotten this pushback from the so-called free speech movement, the alt-right or whatever, against where they're like, whoa, they're still people, which is really interesting, right?
But don't you still kill people in most shooting video games, whether they're Nazis or anything else?
Yeah, I guess. Yeah. I mean, if they were Arabs, I'm sure it'd be fine, as far as like those people are concerned or whatever. But yeah, so and it's also controversial because it's in present day America and kind of ties Nazism to a spectrum of white supremacy. Anyway, so that's actually not the weird news, right? Is that putting out a game where one kills Nazis is controversial in the US. What's weird is that the game is banned in Germany.
Interesting.
Because for no reason can you have Nazi imagery in Germany.
True.
Even if it is a game slamming Nazis and white supremacy where you murder them, it's still a no-go. And so there is a different version of the game coming out in Germany where you're not killing Nazis, you're just killing some group that you don't like, essentially.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, who knows? That could all change.
How backwards is it? Germany is the country that made that finally was like, you can't kill Nazis in that game. You can kill somebody, but not Nazis.
But you know what, though? That could change. The Angela Merkel, she tried to put together a coalition government. It failed. They may go back to an election. AfD could get more votes, and who knows? Maybe they'll overturn the law.
Yeah.
And there you go. It'll be good for the video game industry, I guess.
And Nazis.
Yeah. So. And
normally there is an allowance for Nazi imagery apparently in art, but perhaps rightfully, perhaps wrongfully so. In Germany, video games are not considered art.
Not considered art. There we go. So in South Carolina, a man was hungry in the middle of the night, and he decided to go to a Waffle House, and he couldn't find any employees at the Waffle House, so he decided to go back into the kitchen and start making his own food. It turns out he then spotted the employees. They were sleeping in a booth. So he went back, he made his own meal, he had his, I guess you would call it a Brenner? I don't know. He had his meal at the Waffle House, he went home, and then came back and paid for his meal. And he actually took pictures of himself with one of the employees smiling, showing that he did in fact pay the bill. And Waffle House, they released a statement about the situation. They said, for safety reasons, here's a quote from them, for safety reasons, our customers should never have to go behind the counter.
Yeah, that's an insurance nightmare.
Yeah. They said, rather, they should get the quality experience delivered by friendly associates. We are reviewing the incident and will take appropriate disciplinary action.
That's what's really unfortunate about this is he's taking photos with these employees, and he's taking photos at this, and it gets the employees in trouble is the problem.
But they were sleeping on the job. I mean,
for what Waffle House pays someone, they should take a nap, not for nothing.
Fine, schedule a nap time. I don't know. It's an interesting situation. It reminds me of this diner that I go to, and not because the employees are sleeping, but I go to Mullins sometimes down on the north side near the 16th Street Bridge, and I love it there. It's great, and it's not because Beth, who's there, isn't working. She is. She's working her ass off. But it's just a place where it's got such this community environment that people literally just come in and pour their own coffee and sit down. And she comes up to them, "Oh, what do you need?" And I see people go behind the counter all the time to get more coffee, and it's pretty funny. But it's just got a different kind of culture. It's not because she's sleeping or slacking off.
I take a nap at work occasionally, nothing long, but like we have two shifts. You have a day shift and an evening shift, and you have like an hour and a half where there's probably no customers in between, probably, right? And so we've got all these booths. I'll lay down on my back in a booth, with my legs kind of hanging out, and I'll take a quick 20. It's shown, it's fucking science that you'll be a better worker for the rest of the day if your brain gets...
I wouldn't survive if I didn't take naps on my 15-minute breaks.
Yeah, well, exactly, right? Well, we don't get official breaks, and even when we do, there's nowhere in the restaurant to, like, officially take a nap. Like, there's no back room with a cot or anything like that, so...
Which is something I think that we should start implementing across workforces throughout the United States, nap time. That would be fantastic.
Oh, absolutely.
Especially for people who do work overnight, like these Waffle House employees, because that could be a huge pain. It's really bad for you. There's studies that suggest that people who work overnight are more likely to get cancer and other
capitalism is
diseases.
Ruthless.
Yeah. What do you say about my job, which is pseudo government? It's somewhat ruthless.
It still functions on a capitalist logic, right?
It does, yeah. So,
bit of trivia with Waffle House.
Yes,
is that FEMA uses Waffle House as their scale for determining how bad a disaster might be.
I've heard this.
Go on.
What they do is they call the Waffle House. If the Waffle House answers, that's one level. If they're having certain problems, that's another. If they're not answering at all, then they know they have a very, very severe disaster, and that's the highest level.
That's hilarious.
Yeah, that's pretty fantastic.
And they actually use that. That's when the hurricanes strike and everything.
So in the north, do they use IHOP?
I don't know. They use it down there. Are there Waffle Houses up here? I guess
we don't.
There is
hurricanes.
Well,
we don't get
hurricanes. Agnes came up here. We had some severe flooding when
okay,
Agnes
but like
came up.
in New York, you have coastal stuff. Like
we had an
Sandy,
earthquake.
You know what I mean?
I survived the earthquake that came through Western Pennsylvania.
Saying, there are no Waffle Houses in New York or Connecticut.
There is a Waffle House in Pennsylvania, in Southwest PA.
Yeah, exactly. The Mason-Dixon is the Waffle House IHOP line.
Yeah, we have the one in Washington. There's one in Washington, Pennsylvania. There's a Waffle House there. Here we could use, I guess, Eaton Parks in Pittsburgh to determine that, right?
Yeah.
So,
speaking of the South and there being the Waffle House in Washington, PA, is that area is the largest KKK in the country.
Yeah, right.
Really? I did not know that.
The KKK lobbied to bring Southern culture up to
the KKK in southwestern Pennsylvania is the largest in the country.
And it's located in Washington.
It's
or like their headquarters?
Greene County down the southern counties.
Okay.
They actually meet at the Waffle House. They were like, where are we supposed to meet if there's no Waffle House in this town?
So they petitioned to bring one to Washington.
Yeah. They tried to sit in an IHOP and they were like, and like no one could quite like get a comfy, like it just doesn't feel right. And everyone's kind of shifting in the booth. And afterwards they were like, something just felt off about that meeting. And one guy finally was like, you know what? It wasn't in a Waffle House.
Wasn't in a Waffle House. So, traveling to Washington is a pain in the ass. And traveling to the airport can be a pain in the ass as well. And I know you, David, you had an idea.
Actually, it was one time you could take rail down to Washington. You could go down on streetcars when we had them.
Well, it's funny
that
because
was extensive enough.
I grew up out in Westmoreland County in the North Irwin, actually. And I would go to Cal U. And it even though geographically it's not that far, it was such a huge inconvenience to try to get down there because you had to go like way out of your way, all the way up to like New Stanton to then catch 70 back down to 43 to get to Cal U. Huge inconvenience. Whereas like here in Pittsburgh, it's actually easier to get there. And even then, it's like going down 51. I actually prefer to go out like I'm going towards the airport, go down the Parkway West, then hit 79, and then backtrack. It's just like a nightmare.
Mm-hmm. Well, speaking of the airport, one of the things that is on the Amazon list is the connection to the airport. And 25 years ago, we had an opportunity to put rapid rail to the airport. which would have connected into the airside terminal to where Steel Plaza is now. That was before they spent a huge amount of public money to let Mellon Bank put the building on top. They were looking for hotels, and I can tell you that property they wouldn't have had to hunt for people. They would have had to really had a bidding war on that property if it had been connected to the airport. The route that would do it could provide for rapid rail up to well over 120 miles an hour, which would make 10 minutes from the city into the airside terminal. So you'd be closer to your plane on the South Shore over there by Station Square, for example, than you would in the parking lot of the airport itself.
Wow.
That effectively would move the airport into the city. But as I mentioned earlier, the proposal is to move the city out to the airport. And that has devastating impact on all of the communities that are existing now. That's what's going to be ripping the rug right out from underneath them. But if we had that rapid rail, now, could we still do it? Yes. A lot of the route is still available. It wouldn't come in quite the same way. It wouldn't necessarily go into Steel Plaza. But down Station Square, where the big parking lot now is, and we're waiting for it to be used, that if you had an airside terminal there, 10 minutes into the change of plane where you get on the rail, just as you would on your plane, you check your baggage, your ticket and everything. You would get out to the airport airside terminal, the same as changing from a commuter flight to your main flight, and you'd be on your way. That would be effectively moving the airport into the downtown. Now, they're talking about tearing down the landside terminal out there. They're talking about even accelerating when they want to do that. So this is a perfect time to be talking about this, looking at this. The route's there. Will it happen? Well, we've been held hostage from the expectations of maglev, which a lot of speculators have put money into, and they dare not allow having effective rail technology be there, because then we wouldn't need maglev. There is some discussion of extending the T out there, but the route that it would go and bounce around and everything, it'd still take 90 minutes or so to get to the airport on the T. That's not going to be very effective, but a rapid rail could effectively move it in. And there's another thing to consider too. And now they could even look at a site like the Civic Arena site. It would cost a lot more to go there than to Station Square. But we're talking about the idea of the Hyperloop.
Yes.
And if that happens, if you brought it into the city instead of 20 miles away to the airport, you have your landside terminal offering both Hyperloop and the connection to the airport, you would have a major impact on what's happening in Pittsburgh for the positive. But it could also be extended down the Mon Valley. You could extend that rapid rail down the Mon Valley to a lot of the industrial properties that haven't been used yet for just-in-time manufacturing capabilities, for air freights coming in and being just minutes from their delivery. This would change things considerably. Rather than using it for commercial or resort residential housing and things, we could use that land, which is really would make it much more valuable than it is now, for the highest tech manufacturing.
Why is there this push to move everything out of the city? Because for years we've heard complaints about people leaving the city and business leaving the city, but you're right, they do make it convenient for people to leave the city.
Well, one of the things that that I've often said about the conference is that their basic philosophy is that it's not that we're doing the wrong things, it's that we're not doing enough of the wrong things, and we need to do more of them faster and a larger scale. And so they have been behind this notion of land consumption, spreading out, make it bigger, make it bigger. They went from 6 counties, they expanded SPRPC into SPC, which is Southwestern. It was originally Southwestern Pennsylvania Regional Planning Commission. They made it SPC, Southwestern Pennsylvania Commission. They combined transportation planning with real estate speculation so that it could be even more subsidized and pushed forward.
But they still don't get anything right. I mean, it still is impossible to get anywhere outside of the city.
Well, it doesn't matter. You see, it isn't whether it makes sense. It's whether it makes dollars for the players who have their items on the agenda. There's a sacrosanct agenda that's there. It is what gives them their power. When Pete Flaherty was in as mayor, they almost went under because Pete didn't pay any attention to them. That pulled the plug out from under the agenda. The players who were putting their items there and then paying each of the real estate speculation is the number one contribution to these campaigns. And so without getting any benefit back from what they're as a player, they say, why do we need you? And they didn't go along with things. Unfortunately, he left early, and then when Caligiuri came in, he jumped back on the bandwagon, and they orchestrated to where they are now. They operate under various aliases. They reorganized the county government to make them more powerful even, using one of their aliases, Pennsylvania Economy League. The Chamber of Commerce is now the conference, the regional partnership. These are various aliases that they use. They have set up entities such as the URA at the city, which has wiped out so
Which
much of the
stands for?
city. Urban Redevelopment Authority, which has wiped out and been responsible for the Allegheny Center, East Liberty, and so many of these other things. They created the Port Authority, getting rid of the largest rail transportation network at that point in the world, still here in Pittsburgh. It was still making a profit. It was 3% profit was making it, and they eliminated that to put buses in and to push Skybus.
Which is falling apart.
Well, there's a lot of that in itself. Its whole program talking about how that went about as the Port Authority and the philosophies and things that happened with the history of that. But so all of these various entities, they created SPRPC, they created the RIDC. SPRPC was to control the entire public sector. It lost that effect. It was controlling everything, education, housing, everything. When HUD cut its funding under Reagan, then they had to shrink down to just transportation. RIDC was to control the public sector, and that's been putting in these regional industrial parks that have been emptying out the existing communities, taking their tax base. So this whole model there is something that once it's in motion has to continue in motion, or else then it goes. And so that's what, if it doesn't make sense, it's making dollars for the players who've put their items on there. Perfect example was one of the speculators that did the Somerset plan out on the slag heap on the other side of the tunnels, the Squirrel Hill tunnels. To get his back, was his proposal for slow-speed maglev. It's only going to cost the public $140 million at the time, which would be probably closer over $250 million,
right,
to go from the Civic Arena site to Steel Plaza, 2 blocks away, with a slow-speed maglev that would go at about 20 miles per hour between them. Only going to cost $140 million.
Wow.
And this is slow-speed maglev, 2 blocks. Put it up. It didn't float on its own and fell down, but they pushed it. They pushed it because it was on the agenda, and they have to keep that agenda moving forward, or they lose the support.
Yeah.
All right.
So do any of these groups have to do with the planning on the north side and with all of the stadium remodeling and everything
All
else
of that's plugged into the conference.
Because I'm wondering, how did the Penguins then avoid that? Because originally, if I remember correctly, they wanted to move the new Penguin Arena to the north side as well, and they were able to fight that and stay where they're at the north side. I mean, in the Hill District.
Yeah, no, they
which drives me nuts because that north side area, they keep trying to make it like something, and people just don't want to go there. If it's not a show or an arena event, that place is a ghost town.
Yeah, well, again, it's picked out now. The Rooneys, of course, they got a lot of payback out of what they had, for the stadiums deals that were there. And the media is tied into this. The main media is part of the conference. The conference is set up.
And that doesn't surprise me at all, because you could see where they pick and choose to criticize.
Well, Bill Block, who was an owner of the Post-Gazette, sat on the conference the same time as Dick Scaife, who owned the Tribune Review. They were both members of the conference. Mm-hmm. And now Dick Scaife it's more like a family affair. He was the little bad boy in the family, and he sometimes challenged them on some things. But by and large, they don't print things. They don't put the information out. Back in '96, on February 29th, Larry Dunn, chairman of the county commissioners, wanted to convert the airport busway to rail to the airport. He announced it at the 6 o'clock news on KDKA. At the end of his presentation there with Andy Sheehan, they said, well, tomorrow we're going to have at 6 p.m. a major story on all of what that's done for other communities. Never happened. And it never appeared. I talked with Brian O'Neill the next day. I was saying, Brian, did you see him on TV? He says, no, I read it in the paper. I said, no, you didn't. He said, yes, I did. I said, no, you didn't. No, you didn't. It wasn't in your paper. 2 months later, he got back to me and he said, I was concerned when I didn't see it in our paper. I went to our editors and asked why not. And they said, we're not going to cover it because it's not going to happen. And so at each meeting that he had gone to, several meetings after that, announcing he wanted to do this, it never made it into the media. Therefore, there was no groundswell because it's an electric idea. It would have caught, and they silenced it. And that's the same thing that's happening with the Amazon deal, to bring it back.
Yeah.
Okay?
So they're really not trying. They're not pushing the government to get that information.
Well, some of them are and stuff, because it isn't as rigid as they mentioned Nazism. It's not quite that rigid.
Yeah.
There's a little more flexibility in there. They work by influence, and they're pretty strong with that influence, but they're not always perfect with it. And so there are little cracks where somebody does something, and you have to read between the lines sometimes to find where these things are, where these impacts are, where they're buried in a study that might be several inches thick, and then it discloses in there, somebody has put in the truth about what it is, that this is basically a hokey study, et cetera, because da-da-da-da-da. And that's what having a citizen advisory panel, where you have citizens that are doing that are working together to go over this and communicating and coordinating on this from various groups and various interests. That's the power of it.
Very interesting. I would love to bring you back on another time,
sure,
if that's fine. I think that would be great. We've been talking with David Tessiter, who is of openpittsburgh.org, the chairman, and I know we had some other things on the agenda today, but I think we can shelf those for next week, because we're running slow on time. We got another show coming in, so we're going to talk next week about freedom of speech and where the limit is, where the line is drawn.
I'm excited for that one.
Yeah, I think that'll be interesting. But I really, really appreciate you coming in,
sure,
David, and giving us some of your knowledge. And I would love to have you back on. I mean, we
sure.
planned on having you scheduled for about 15 minutes, and we ended up taking up most of the hour. But I just thought the information was so great. And this is kind of what I love to talk about is local issues here in Pittsburgh. One thing I hate about talk radio at large is this focus on just national everything. Everything's got to be Trump. Everything's got to be Congress. Everything's got to be... you don't even get world news anymore. Everything is just... late night, for example. I've been talking about late night, where all of the late night hosts now literally just read Donald Trump's Twitter account, and that's their material. That's it. They don't come up with any material. It's literally just reading the news, and they just look at the national news and reading Twitter, and that's the extent of late night comedy now.
And it's wild because you don't realize what you're missing. But like when I lived in D.C. for a couple of years, and there was a period of time where the Washington Post and the Washington Times both have these like sub newspapers or like free dailies that you can get all over the subway, the metro or whatever. One's the Express and one is something else. Mm-hmm. And I would read both of them every day. Right? One has the conservative perspective, one has the liberal perspective. And I realized that all they covered was stuff within the Beltway, and that I had been reading both of these newspapers for months and had no more idea about what was going on in the world than prior to me reading them for months. Because, all they focused on was like what's going on in Congress, which the thing with Congress is unless you're really actively engaging with it, like, lobbying various people, it's a lot like a football game where you can watch everything unfold hour by hour, day by day, or you can like log in at the end of the season and be like, who's going to the Super Bowl? And you won't have actually missed anything.
Yeah, look what's happened now. And we've accomplished nothing. Not that whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, they haven't accomplished anything with Republican everything. We had a similar situation in Pennsylvania with Tom Corbett having a Republican legislature in both the Senate and the House and a Republican court. But I feel like I either want to know what's going on in Pittsburgh or I want to know what's going on in Palestine. You know what I mean? Like I want things that can put things in context. I don't. Yeah. DC is a shithole. I read the paper every day. I read both the Tribune Review and the Post-Gazette, but I just skip over to the local section and try to give me a starting point as to what I want to talk about. And I've always tried to keep this show as close to local information as possible because I just get so tired of it. But to bring things really, really local, we had a death in the River's Edge family. The original River's Edge studio, which was the Closet Attic studio, was demolished this month.
Oh. It
Well,
couldn't recover from the fire?
Well, no, this is from a different building.
Okay.
The studio from the fire at Millville Studios, that was actually our second location.
Right, I forgot about
our
that.
first location was a closet in my attic where my guests had to sit on a futon and use a wireless microphone to communicate with me and Heather, who was the meteorologist that was with us for a while, who used to report on the weather. And it was a really small space. It was smaller than this space back here where we're standing. Michael and I, for those of you listening, were behind this desk, and the studio was smaller than just the space behind the desk, and there was only enough room for me and one other person, and it was really kind of a dump. There were nails in the wall that Heather would get her hair caught on, and there was insulation all over the floor in the main part of the attic. And it was so hot in there because we had one window air conditioner that was plugged in on the other side of the attic, and that was literally just to try to decrease the humidity a little bit. But where I was in this small closet, it didn't even affect that area at all. And I was surrounded by electronics, and there was at least one time where I literally started woozying back and forth and nearly passed out because the show at the time was a 2-hour-long show.
Wow.
And it was just a crazy experience, but that original studio has been destroyed. They tore down the wall in their remodeling at my place. So it's weird because it's a room, and all I could think about was, man, I wish I could bring this old studio to Hahn Funeral Home and give it a perfect true send-off, because I know the people at Hahn, the family-owned funeral home in Millville, the only one, would have really treated that space with true respect and dignity. But unfortunately, it's just too difficult for me to move an entire room, especially when the room's been destroyed. I don't even have... I guess I could find some remains.
Yeah.
I know, and I know Jamie Hahn, if I wanted to, if I was able to find some remains from this room, I'd be able to bring it to Hahn's, and she would come up with some sort of funeral that would justify the original space.
Well, and
use a photo and do a memorial service.
I could do that. That's a great idea.
And the materials from that are probably going to wind up in a landfill, right? Which is toxic and is, they're
maybe it could end up in our drinking water.
Whereas I'm confident that Hans would find some way to give, because drywall is just made of minerals, and most things are made of wood and drywall. You could give that room a green burial, as Hans is famous for doing.
Yeah.
But
the original studio is no more. And we'll just have to move on. We're on to bigger and better places. We're here in the beautiful Mr. Smalls, and the original studio will always be in my heart. You have been listening to River Talk on the River's Edge Radio Network, Pittsburgh's voice for local music. We've got local music 24 hours a day at riversedgepgh.com. Thanks to David Tessiter of openpittsburgh.org for joining us today. For Michael Cohen, for Zach Fell behind the board, I am Brian Crawford. We've got local music up next right here on the River's Edge.